to really produce some form of effective opposition?
Well, it's not enough. The millions of people who voted for us have been cheated, really, of the result that they deserved. But it's enough for us to build an effective opposition. I'm glad that we have the numbers we have. I'm very sad that we failed by a fingerhold to win places like Chelmsford and Richmond. But the electoral system has clearly defeated us. But with the massive support in the country and the bridgehead we now have in Parliament, I think we will see us in this next Parliament picking up by-elections at a very fast rate. It's very impressive to see how the Liberal and SDP vote in all these constituencies has piled up in a big way.
Is there not a real danger, though, examining the results for your own alliance and the Labour Party tonight, that there could now be a built-in Tory majority in our system?
Well, there's a built-in Tory majority at the moment, but I cannot believe it will last. And I think that now that the country sees that there is the basic support for our new movement, then I think we will see that Tory majority being eroded through the next 4 or 5 years. And I'm quite sure we shall be in a position to challenge the Conservatives directly at the next election.
Mr. Foote was asked earlier on whether he would deal with the SDP and Alliance in terms of joining together. Is any thought in your mind at all about lib-blab pacts again to try and provide a better opposition?
No. I think that the Labour Party is bound to go through a period of very severe internal trouble, and I don't think it's a credible opposition anymore. There are two different wings. I would expect some more people probably to leave the Labour Party and maybe link up with the SDP or ourselves. But I think that there's no question at all of any kind of arrangements between us and the Labour Party in the new Parliament.
When Mr. Foote conceded defeat a little while ago, talking to my colleague David Rose, he looked a bit morose. How do you feel tonight?
I feel outraged that we have been cheated, not we've been cheated, the public have been cheated of the representation they were voting for. To get over a quarter of the votes of the country and only a couple of dozen seats, it really is appalling. No, I'm not morose. I'm buoyed up by the public support that we've had, and I'm sure we're going to go on with the team that we've got in Parliament to prove a very effective force.
David Steele, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Back now to Alistair in London.
Well, the facts are that the Alliance are just 900,000 votes behind Labour, but they're getting on for 200 seats behind Labour as a result of how things are going now. There's a second recount at Leicester South. They're going to be recounting through the night for quite some time. I think I'd like to have a word. We're saying Tory majority of 140 seats. That is our forecast now. But of course, for the first time in electronic history, a government has been returned on the night. Now, Martin's got some details about how that happened.
We're going to look at some seats that have been held by the Alliance, but first, how Labour have been doing in three remaining seats that they've managed to hang on to. They, in fact, have taken Glasgow Cathcart. John Maxton is back in Parliament there. His majority, 4,000, and a swing to Labour of 7.6%. In Hackney South and Shoreditch, the SDP's Ron Brown, Lord George Brown's brother, is pushed down to third place. He's out to Brian Sedgemore. We're going right over to Finchley, where the Prime Minister is just leaving.
Yes, I am. And the Prime Minister getting ready to leave Finchley. She said in her speech upstairs what a great honour but responsibility she felt a second term was going to be. She said it hadn't been just a walkover type of campaign, that she'd tried to work very hard to put the issues to the nation. Just waiting, I think, for the cars to be brought up. Mr. Thatcher there. She paid Mr. Thatcher a very special, rather moving tribute. Said what a great help he had been. During the declaration, as you may have seen, one of the other candidates who represents anti-censorship tried to move towards her, appeared to sort of lunge towards her with a white umbrella. The car is now just pulling up, and Mrs. Thatcher will go to her constituency headquarters. They're screaming Lord Such, saying goodbye. She will go up to her headquarters to thank her party workers. Wave for all those people outside. A lot of people have been here waiting to see her. So she's now in her car. She'll go up to her Finchley headquarters, and then she will go straight to Central Office after that, where she'll want to greet and thank everybody there who's worked for this victory for her. Back now to the studio.
Well, Mrs. Thatcher is now on her way back into London. It is, of course, the very small hours of the morning, in fact, getting less small as the morning goes on, but that is a very successful and happy woman going. Patrick Jenkin, what do you expect her to do now? When do you expect to see her again?
I don't know.
Is she going to ring you up here? I mean, have we got a telephone ready for you?
She has all my telephone numbers. I've made sure of that.
But just getting back, you have one or two things I think that you want to say about the conduct of the campaign and about the reasons why the Conservatives have won. Now, the charge is being made by Mr. Varley and Mr. Kinnock before him, and by Mr. Penhaligon and the Alliance. First, that your victory is a hollow one in numbers, and secondly, that it's not even a moral victory, that you're losing the argument. Sorry, I think we have Mrs. Thatcher in her car now, sitting still in her car on her way back to London, with all the plaudits from her count. She's going through the night streets now, and she knows that she has won. It is 5 more years. She has won in a way that Edward Heath was not returned by the country, nor Harold Macmillan, nor Anthony Eden, nor indeed Winston Churchill. She is the first Prime Minister for 83 years to win for herself 2 full consecutive terms of government. And whatever happens in the next 5 years, and her opponents will make sure that a lot does happen, they will never be able to take this morning away from her, or her achievement for the Conservative Party. Well, we heard her tribute to Dennis Thatcher. We know how she does feel about her family, and now she is on her way to Conservative Central Office and to the celebration. There can be nothing else, probably a greater celebration than there was in 1979. And all that really remains now to be decided is, when does a landslide become a landslip? Anyway, I was talking to Patrick Jenkin.
I think we have a complete moral victory here. The system which we have governed our affairs now since we've had universal adult suffrage has been on the basis of the first past the post. And the fact of the matter is, whatever David Penhaligon and David Steele and all the rest of them may say, the Alliance candidates have not succeeded in attracting enough votes to win them more than a handful of seats. That's the truth of the matter. The fact of the matter is they come second, but there are no prizes for being second. And to claim that therefore they have some sort of moral right to participate in government, or whatever it might be, is really quite bogus. Elections are held to choose governments, and they do in fact succeed in doing that, and choosing governments, moreover, on the basis that you have one member of Parliament to represent the constituents in each constituency. And it achieves that. And it's a very satisfactory system which has given us strong government, and a government, moreover, of different parties at different times. It so happens at this time it's the Conservative Party that we have succeeded in winning enough support in enough constituencies substantially to increase our majority in the House.
But Mr. Varley, do you think this is going to be a steamroller in the House of Commons?
I think it's going to be very interesting how Mrs. Thatcher now commands her government and who she leaves in it and who she takes out. I think Patrick Jenkins will probably go as Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Sir Geoffrey Howe will go to be Home Secretary, and Willie Whitelaw will go to lead the House of Lords or something of that sort, and there may be a different Lord Chancellor, so I think there'll be a shuffle. It'll be a question whether there's important positions for Jim Pryor and Peter Walker and people like that. I don't think there necessarily will, although there won't be a sweep right at the beginning. Just as she operated in the last Parliament, she'll and eased out Gilmore and Stingent Stevens, she'll start to ease those people. And I think it will be a question whether she still adopts a strident and, in some cases, bellicose attitude. Remember, a few years ago, Mrs. Thatcher said she was prepared to confront anybody. Now, I think if we're going to overcome the formidable problems face our nation, then she's got to draw more and more people from outside the Conservative Party into the conference room. It's no good driving them onto the streets.
You're talking about the trade unions now, are you?
Oh, yes, absolutely, yes. You see, it suits the Conservatives' book at the moment to keep the Trade Union Congress on the NEDC, where I think it's valuable to have them there, and on ACAS and on the Manpower Services Commission. But up to the moment, they've been very unwelcome guests on a bilateral basis to Number 10, or Her Majesty's Treasury, or the Department of Employment. She shut them out of that. Now, I think it's time to draw them back.
Could I show Eric Farley something on the VT80? It was a result of our exit poll today. We asked how trade union members voted today, and here's the outcome of that. 29% of trade union members voted Conservative, 39% voted Labour, and 29% voted for the Alliance. So a majority of trade union members, on a massive opinion poll today conducted after people voted, a majority of trade union members voted for a party other than Labour.
Yes, I don't dispute those figures one little bit, nor can I dispute them, but that doesn't alter the point that I'm making. If the country is in great economic difficulty and all the rest of it, and we want to get out of the slump as quickly as possible, the only way we're going to do it is not by trying to have more penal legislation against the trade unions, a further Tebbit bill or a Pryor bill, but draw them much more into consultation. And I'm afraid that that's not happened. You see, nobody's going to disinvent the trade unions, and there's no good senior ministers in the Conservative government, and I exclude Patrick Jenkins from this, insulting representatives of work people every time they open their mouth, as has happened with Mr. Tebbit. Now's the time, if they're going to use their majority, is to draw in the representatives of workers.
Now, before Mr. Jenkins replies to that, Mr. Penhaligon, you've been sitting very patiently. What do you think the next House of Commons is going to be? Just a rubber stamp for Conservative legislation?
Well, certainly I've never sat in a House where a party's got a majority of 140. Quite clearly they can. It might take a while, but they can get absolutely anything through the House of Commons they choose. One of the all-time ironies may suddenly hit our parliamentary system in that one of our great bastions for freedom may well become the House of Lords, and certainly in the Parliament that's just gone through, there has been several times where the House of Lords have rebuffed Conservative legislation, and thank goodness for that, and it's not in the end hit the actual legislative book in this country. Now that would be an incredible irony. It is a reflection in some ways of just how far to the right the Conservative Party is stripped, and that the House of Lords even can't stand it. But one of the great ironies may well be that, but quite clearly a majority of 140, they can get through anything they fancy.
Mr. Jenkins.
Well, I'd like just to come back to the points that Eric Varley has made. The point he made earlier about unemployment and in the election. Then I'll come to the second point, the one he's just made. I think we took the argument about unemployment head-on right from the beginning. Mrs. Thatcher's own speech she made at her adoption meeting, I think, rather startled the press with how forthrightly she tackled the whole issue of unemployment and brought it right into the election on our terms. And I think we carried that argument all the way through, and I have to tell Eric Varley, I do not think that the Labour's remedies for unemployment carried any conviction at all. And then perhaps I could come to his second point about the trade unions. The Conservatives are not against the trade unions. Oh. What we are against is irresponsible trade unionism. And what we propose to do, have already done and will do, is to make trade unions more answerable to their own members. And I think that is why a substantial number, nearly 30% of trade unionists actually voted Conservative, according to the Harris poll, which you referred to, Alistair.
There's no doubt at all that the Conservative government is not planning, but expects unemployment to go up even further. And they said as much 10 days before the budget this year in the white paper. I forget what the figure was, 280,000 or something of that kind. You see, I'm not suggesting that... What I object to is Mr. Tebbit, or somebody like Mr. Tebbit, deciding that he's going to lay down what he believes to be democracy for the trade union, a standard pattern for every different trade union. All the welcome reforms that are taking place, for example, in the trade union movement, all that will come to a shuddering halt. And if we're not careful, we should go back to the days where they had to wheel out official solicitors to get people out of jail and all that sort of thing, which is wrong. No, if it's good enough to have the TUC sit down with the CBI and the government in NEDC and other organisations, why can't they call them in for discussions in the Treasury, as was the case with previous governments? I'm not talking about Labour governments. Harold Macmillan used to call them in, Walter Monckton, Ian MacLeod. It's a different type of Conservative party, Conservative government altogether. It's a pretty hard party. And I think if, whilst this government lasts, and it's obviously going to last for a full parliament if it wants to stay, it ought to go back to that. That's the way to heal the nation.
But are you saying that violence will come on the streets now?
No, I'm not. Well, I'm not saying that violence will come on the street, or I don't want it to come on the street, but I'm saying if you shut people out, if you don't, and I use the phrase again, if you don't get them round the conference table, the only way they go then is onto the streets and into Trafalgar Square. And that's alien to the British political system, and I think the best ethos of the Conservative Party in yesteryear.
If you'd stuck to that argument throughout the election of bringing the unions in more, with some sort of sensible strategy for dealing with employment, with a modest reflation in prices and incomes policy, then I believe you could have made a great deal of progress. The fact is,
you might have come second in a great many more.
You have let the Conservatives off the hook on this issue in the election by putting forward an answer to employment.
You've just gained the seats.
People believe it's even worse.
Well, St Halligan, you've just gained a seat.
Perhaps I should talk more on this programme, and then we would gain more seats.
We'll come back to a moment. That actually means that Mr. Ian Sprout, the aviation minister, who's part of your setup, he made a mistake.
Yeah, well, I never studied the figures very closely, but it has clearly been...
His old seat has stayed Conservative.
Well, it had clearly been recognised that the seat that he chose to fight in the Borders, where he originally came from, I mean, that was his home part of the country. I think it was a perfectly reasonable, natural thing for him to do. It was always marginal. And in the event, he's not held it, and I'm very sorry, because he's been an extremely competent minister.
Well, now we'll go to Martin Lewis for some more results. Martin.
And some small consolation for Mr. Varley. 2 remaining seats in our system that Labour has gained. Details of those. First of all, in Liverpool West Derby, Eric Ogden, who defected from Labour to the SDP, he is out, pushed down to 3rd place, and Labour are back home there. Their majority, 11,800. And in Islington North, now that's a very interesting seat, because Jeremy Corbyn has taken that for Labour, ousting John Grant, who defected from Labour to the SDP, and also ousting Michael O'Halloran, who was a Labour Member of Parliament who toyed with the SDP for a while and then went independent and fought the seat as an independent Labour. So very much a mixed bag there in Islington, but Labour coming out on top with a majority of 5,500. Low turnout there, 62%. And let's have a look at how the Alliance have been doing so far. Clement Freud is safely home in Cambridge and North East. His majority is up almost 4,000 to 5,000, a swing his way of 3.5% and a lost deposit for Labour there. In Ceredigion and Pembroke North, Geraint Howells, the Welsh Liberal leader, is safely home. His majority up 4,500 to 5,500 and a swing his way of 4.9%. In Colne Valley, Richard Wainwright, well, Colne Valley hasn't returned a Tory for 101 years, so presumably they're not going to start now, even with the boundary changes. Richard Wainwright is safely home there, his majority 3,000 and a swing his way of 6%. In Gordon, that's a good victory there for the Liberals. That should have been Tory territory under the boundary changes. The Liberal majority, 850. It took a 6.5% swing to them to do that. And in Leeds West, Labour expected to win that. The Liberals are home in Leeds West with a majority of 2,000. The turnout, 69%, swing to the Liberals of 18.6%. That could well be one of their biggest swings of the night. And in Montgomery, Alex Carlisle, they're getting revenge for his defeat by Delwyn Williams in the 79 election. That is a seat that up to 79 had remained solidly Liberal for 99 years, and now at last the Liberals have got it back. They were always terribly annoyed that they lost it, and there is a Liberal majority there of 668 with a lost deposit for Labour, a swing to the Liberals in Montgomery of 3.9%. In Rochdale, Cyril Smith safely home, his majority up 3,000 to 7,500, and that's the last result we'll take at the moment. Swing to the Liberals in Rochdale, they're 3.4%, but Let's go over now to Glyn Mathias at Conservative Central Office just to see what's happening there. Glyn, what's happening down there?
Well, the crowds here at Central Office have been building up over the last half an hour. They're waiting for the triumphant arrival of Mrs. Thatcher from her count at Finchley. They've been celebrating for an hour or so now. We've been hearing cheers as some of the results have been coming through, in particular the result in Bristol East when Mr. Tony Benn lost his seat. That brought the biggest cheer of all. There is, in fact, a party going on here on several levels. The party's been going on every floor in the 6-storey building behind me, as party workers have been celebrating all that hard work that they've been doing in the past few weeks. Mr. Cecil Parkinson has spent a lot of the evening here when he hasn't been in your studios or in fact in his own constituency, and several other senior party figures have been here celebrating the results as they've been coming in. And now over to the Labour Party headquarters and Ian Ross.
Well, there are certainly no crowds here at Labour Party headquarters in South East London. It's been a very quiet picture all night. There seems to have been an acceptance right from the start that the Conservatives would win a resounding victory. There have been a few union leaders around: Clive Jenkins, Ken Cure, Sam McCluskey, the Labour Party chairman this year, Barbara Castle was here earlier, but they all drifted away quite some time ago. But there must now be questions raised and doubts expressed about the kind of campaign they waged, the kind of leadership they had, individual and collective, and the kind of manifesto they put before the country. Mr. Michael Foot is on his way back now from South Wales, should arrive here between about 5 and 6. We await his arrival at a very quiet Labour Party headquarters. Now back to the studio.
The Tories to win, but there's clearly great disappointment here that the Alliance hasn't made a breakthrough in terms of seats, and enormous frustration that so many votes should produce so few seats. There have been bright spots, of course. Cheers went up when David Owens and Roy Jenkins' victories were announced. But apart from that, most of the good news has been for the Liberals. And looking around, you can almost tell the Liberal supporters from the SDP supporters by the expression on their faces. Some SDP MPs were close to tears as their MPs went down like 9 pins. And it's clear there's going to be a very painful period for the Alliance, with the SDP struggling to reassert its identity. Now back to the studio.
Yes, that is true. There are going to be ructions inside the Alliance. And I think it may be that some of those, like Mr. Jenkins and Dr. Owen, both of whom retained their seats, although with, so far as we know now, there are still some seats to declare, very, very few followers, far many more chiefs than there are Indians. Something may have to come out of that. And indeed, for Mr. Steele, who is the victor of the centre tonight, with increased Liberal numbers, he too may now find that he is forced, in fact by his own party, even if it goes against his own wishes, to put his foot down. Well, we saw that there was no one at Labour Party headquarters. Defeat is an orphan, and victory has many fathers. Except that I think in the Conservative Party they would have to say that it was Mrs. Thatcher who was not only the issue of the election, but that every poll, from when the election began, including our exit poll tonight, they say Mrs. Thatcher made the difference. I think Martin has got some more results now to show just how much Mrs. Thatcher made a difference.
Yes, well, in fact, the first result I want to show you, Alistair, is Stockton South, where the Conservatives didn't do quite as well as they would have liked to. They came within a whisker of winning that seat, 102 votes. Ian Wrigglesworth, the Labour man who defected to the SDP, has managed to cling on there, but only just. His majority, 102. And we can look at a couple of seats that the Conservatives have gained. Cunningham North, as we mentioned earlier, a little bit against the trend there. That was expected to be a Labour seat. John Corrie, the anti-abortionist, he is in there. His majority 1,600 and a swing his way of 2.4%. In the Wrekin, Warren Hawksley is home. Labour's Bruce Grocott out there. The Conservative majority 1,300 and a swing to the Conservatives of 2.5%. One SNP seat for you in the Western Isles, Donald Stewart. The details of that result: it is the smallest constituency in Britain, only 23,000 voters, 66% of them turned out, to put him back with an increased majority up to 3,700, and lost deposit for Conservatives and Liberals. That's probably one of the few lost Conservative deposits you'll see tonight, a swing to the SNP of 2.1% in the Western Isles. Plaid Cymru in Wales, 2 seats, same as they had in the last Parliament. David Wigley home in Carnarvon. his majority is up very slightly to 11,000, a lost deposit for the Liberals there. He's, of course, is the leader of Plaid Cymru in the House, and a swing his way of 0.9%. And in Meirionydd, Nant Conway, David Ellis-Thomas, the other member of Plaid Cymru in the last Parliament, is home. His majority up 854 to 2,600. High turnout, 81% in that strong Welsh-speaking area, and a swing to Plaid Cymru of 1.7%. And now it looks as though we can see how the Labour leaders are getting on, although I suspect we know how most of them are doing. Peter Shaw, the details of his result there. His majority was down 4,500 to just over 6,000. Very low turnout of 56% in Bethnal Green. Swing to the Liberals of 8.6%, pushing them into second place. Right, and we're going back now to the... in fact, let's take one more result while we're waiting to go somewhere else. It's a very exciting programme, this. We're never quite sure where we're going until the last minute. In Birmingham Sparkbrook, Roy Hattersley is home there. His majority virtually unchanged, 10,500. Low turnout again, 61%, and a swing to Labour, almost worth not recording in Birmingham Sparkbrook, but Roy Hattersley safely home. That's all for now. Alistair.
And we have the Prime Minister approaching Smith Square and Conservative Central Office, and the reception that is readying itself for her. And she began the campaign with rather a bad cold, and like some of the people we've had on the programme tonight, her throat got a bit hoarse now and again, but now all she wants to do is to talk and enjoy it and say how she feels, and I've no doubt that she's got something to say to the faithful and the party workers as the car comes on down now from North London. It'll probably come through Trafalgar Square, along past the House of Commons themselves, and then turn right into Smith Square and Conservative Central Office. And that's the face of the winner. That's the face of the winner who has 5 years to go. Many prophecies being made tonight by Mr. Varley, by Mr. Kinnock, by Mr. Penhaligon, by all her opponents. But as she was the issue in the campaign, and as there was never any question about who the country preferred to have as a leader, it is now in her hands to decide which way she is going to go in the next 5 years. This is Margaret Hilda Thatcher, who has done what no man has done for 83 years. That's our helicopter above her, linking the picture, which is live from her car, the Prime Ministerial car, which tells her that she's on her way. She hasn't quite got the landslide, which she said she would be perfectly happy to have, but it's a good question whether a majority of 138 helps or hinders in what she said she was going to do with the outside world. America has expected her to win. They said that she was running for president. And here at Central Office, on the pavement outside, they're waiting. Well, they've had 4 weeks of hard work, and now they're going to get their reward. The victor is coming to them. And this is the sort of picture which will be seen around the world tomorrow as Mrs. Thatcher has won. It was the picture they expected when she went to the Williamsburg summit, and President Reagan did his bit. Here are the Central Office girls, the Central Office ladies. They do the typing. Of course, their seats from the southern counties have been instrumental, crowding every window, looking down over the square. And of course, in the old days, the building opposite was Labour Party headquarters, Transport House. Now, Glyn Mathias is down on the pavement. Glyn?
Hello, Alistair. We're here waiting for Mrs. Thatcher to arrive. She's still a short distance away, I believe, and we're still waiting to see exactly when she will get here. The crowd has been building up for some time now. You can probably see some of the party workers and those who've been working for the party hanging out of the windows, waiting for her to arrive, waving a few flags. And Mr. Parkinson is here. Mr. Parkinson standing next to me, even as I'm telling them that Mrs. Thatcher is about to arrive. What's your feeling now?
Well, I'm absolutely delighted. We've we will be Mrs. Thatcher is going to be the first Conservative Prime Minister for many, many years, to be, having been elected, to be re-elected. We're going to go into our second term with a thumping majority. We've got a manifesto which we've worked out, and we'll now be able to implement it, so I'm delighted.
And what is the priorities going to be for the next Conservative government?
Priorities are to keep inflation under control.
You could turn around. You could just turn around and face the camera, Mr. Parkins. If I could ask you that question again, and perhaps the viewers can actually see you as you answer it. What are the priorities going to be now?
Priorities are to keep inflation under control, get it down further if we can, and build on all the good things that have been happening in the British economy, the increased productivity, competitiveness, and so on. But inflation is at the heart of the whole thing. And if we follow the policies that we've been following for 4 years, which were endorsed at Williamsburg, I believe that you will see a gradual and steady improvement in the fortunes of our country. And that's good news for all of us.
And do you think we're going to see big changes in the cabinet?
There may be some, but that's a matter for Mrs. Thatcher. I've been concentrating on the election.
If I may stop you, Mr. Parkinson, if I can hand over to Roxburgh now.
This election was as follows. David Alfred Briggs, Labour Party, 2,326. Archibald Johnson Kirkwood, Liberal SDP Alliance, 15,920. Robert Shirley, Scottish National Party, 852. Ian MacDonald Sproat, Conservative Party, 12,524. I will repeat that figure, 12,524, and I hereby declare that Archibald Johnson Kirkwood has been duly elected to serve as the Member of Parliament for this constituency.
And this is how that result in the new seat of Roxburgh and Berwickshire happened. The share of the vote there, Liberal took 50%, Conservative 40%, Labour 7% and SNP 3%. The change of the share of the vote compared with an estimated result for 1979, because this seat didn't exist then, the Liberal up 10.3%, the Conservative down 0.5%, Labour down 5.6%, SNP down 4.1%. And very clearly the influence of Liberal country, David Steele's seat next door, in fact a substantial chunk of his old seat is in this new seat, that tipped the balance, and Ian Sproat is without a seat in the new Parliament, whereas hundreds of others from his party are with a seat. I wonder if we have a brief moment to just take a look at the gains that have happened in Scotland tonight. Let's take out the Central Lowlands to magnify them a bit. There have been 2 Conservative gains at Renfrew West and Inverclyde, and at Cunningham North, the old Ayrshire North seat that was. There has been 1 Labour gain at Glasgow Cathcart and 2 Liberal gains at Gordon, Aberdeenshire West and Roxburgh and Berwickshire, which you just saw declared. Let's go to the other region of the British Isles, Wales. 3 Conservative gains there at Newport West, Cardiff West and Bridgend. 1 Liberal gain at Montgomery, back in the fold. And the other... Well, I'm going to stop there for a moment because I would go on to another region, but Mrs. Thatcher is approaching Conservative headquarters in her hour of triumph. Perhaps you'd like to pick up, Alistair.
Yes, it's getting to be the familiar picture of the face of triumph, a Roman triumph. And Mrs. Thatcher has had probably the most enjoyable journey of her life, except perhaps when she first went to Buckingham Palace to kiss hands as Prime Minister. This time she knows she's won and won again. It may well be that in her first election victory she underpolled as a leader. After all, Mr. Callaghan led her all the way through that when the polls were counted in 1979. This time she may well have caught all that up. And outside Conservative headquarters, well, they're happy to wait all night. And there is an important result for the SDP. John Cartwright, one of their organisers, holding in Woolwich. So there are going to be a few Indians as well as chiefs with the SDP to confront Mrs. Thatcher.
Alistair, do Prime Ministers have to revisit Buckingham Palace if they're re-elected?
No, Peter, I don't think they have to technically, but I think the Queen would take it as a very decent gesture if she were to turn up on an invitation. Actually, Peter, as you know very well, we're all in the habit of not re-electing our prime ministers, and therefore the question hasn't arisen for quite a number of years. No, but I would imagine that she would go. At least there's one thing, I think, Peter, that the Queen's advisers in the palace, who had been watching very carefully through those years when the Conservatives were very low indeed in the opinion polls, Mrs. Thatcher at one stage, it's almost idle to recall it perhaps, but 2.5 years ago she was the most unpopular Prime Minister since the war. And the palace advisers had been looking and saying, well, what would happen if there were indeed a hung parliament, such as Mr. Penhaligon wanted or Mr. Steele wanted? That hasn't happened, so that is something that is off the palace's list of responsibilities. And it all that depends now is a phone call to say, would you like to come round? And at Smith Square, every car that comes is expectation. They have the Union Jacks. This is what they work for. I see there, there's the political correspondent of The Economist passing through. They've all waited there to see her, with Mr. Parkinson, as Glyn Mathias was saying, out on the pavement.
If she doesn't go to Buckingham Palace, what will our cameraman there do in the morning, Alistair?
Oh, I think there'll be plenty of people staring at Buckingham Palace, as there will be at Downing Street. Of course, Downing Street these days is rather roped off because of all sorts of threats and worries and so on, as you know very well. It's difficult to get into Downing Street unless you've got a pass and unless they really do want to see you. How different from, say, 1959, which was the last comparable triumph for the Conservative Party, when Harold Macmillan went back into number 10 and was able to walk out to the crowds lining the street with his hands outstretched and saying, I think it all went off very well indeed. Well, Mrs. Thatcher is her natural successor. Someone was writing in the Wall Street Journal, Americans have been taking quite an interest in this election, as have the